Welcome everyone to the first edition of SDG Action Conclave 2020. We are conducting today's session focusing on Sustainable Development Goal 12, that is responsible consumption and production. Before we begin the session, let me tell you a bit about Youth Forum. Youth Forum is a project under Alexis Society, and our team consists of inspired young students and professionals who are solely interested in creating positive social impact by conducting research on policy issues, writing thought-provoking and insightful blogs, designing creative social campaigns, organizing life-changing events, and interviewing leaders and change makers. As it is correctly said that the youth are not only the leaders for tomorrow, but also the partners of today. So we at Youth Forum are a team of creative and encouraging individuals with a shared mission, a mission to change the world. So through this first edition of SDG Action Conclave, we wish to bring together the change makers and the leaders from around the globe under the Act for SDGs campaign week of the United Nations. It will help to create an actionable agenda that will aid all in achieving the sustainable development goals through all the initiatives and more. Right now, the world leaders meet virtually at the United Nations General Assembly to discuss issues and give a solution to tough times. We are trying to do our small bit by taking action and raising awareness and initiating a better direction ahead. The turning point of the planet and the people needs to be now. So let me introduce you to the speaker and the chair, Mr. Darold Cuba. He's a social impact innovator and entrepreneur, a Center for Public Leadership Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, the Ivy League's first Wikipedia Fellow, and inaugural Oral History Fellow at the Washington National Cathedral. With a background at the intersections of media, politics, business, his work has spanned disciplines of journalism, oral history, theater, film, TV, art, advertising, PR, marketing, communications, and emerging technologies. He is the founder of International Association for Freedom Colonies, IAFC, and its Oral History Archives. He's also the founder of hashtag Hacking Racism and Mapping Freedom Initiatives. Now moving on to our chair, Mr. Kunal Mandal. He's the co-founder of GamSpace, a gamification company which uses quizzes and other games as a tool for personal growth and people engagement, and citybitesindia.com, a travel portal which helps travelers to discover and book inspiring cities experiences provided by local experts. Currently, he is on mission to teach curiosity as a life skill, increase awareness about sustainability, and empower young Indians to be more than they thought they could be. So to take forward the session, uh, while trying to arrive at solutions, this session on SDG 12, I would like to hand over the conduct to Mr. Kunal Mandal now.
So Darold, your life journey so quite interesting, from doing a master's in oral history to being an enthusiastic theater artist and actor, and then being also a social impact innovator and disruptor and journalist, and so many diverse fields that you have worked in. It's really amazing to go through some of your stories, but I would love to dig in more into that and know that sort of the questions that I'll probably pose to you is what are some of the key lessons that you have learned along this journey that our young audience today can benefit from?
Well, I'll first start off again, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. And to answer the question, I think the biggest thing I've learned is just to be open to life, right? Many of these, everything I've done, I haven't planned to do. It was not in my cards, not in my path or my plan to do any of these things. And life just sort of opened these doors, I guess, or happen in these ways. So a lot of things, I guess the biggest thing I would tell anyone is just be open and then to be kind, right? And that's something I even had to learn. We can get very busy in the things that we've set out to do, and to always be aware that you're part of a community. And there's a phrase that goes, always be kinder than necessary, because everyone you meet is fighting some kind of battle. So that's, I think, the biggest thing I would be kind and be open.
Thank you for the great message to begin with. And to delve a little deeper, I mean, can you tell us some part of your, sort of key moments of your life which have really transformed you in many ways, and anything that you would like to share?
Well, I think, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Our families, our ancestors, our communities. I think the biggest thing, I was born in Virginia, in this Tidewater part of Virginia, southeastern Virginia, small town called Gloucester, near Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown, America's first district, the colonial era, where the English colonists came in, and the Powhatan saw them as they came in, and of course the first enslaved Africans were brought into that area too for the English colonies. And so I think just growing up in a place like that, my parents were both military, come from a very multi-generational military family. So there was always that commitment to service, to serving people, and to knowing the bigger picture. But steeped in the history of a place like Gloucester and the Tidewater of Virginia, in America's first district, in such a multicultural way. You had the indigenous American communities. There are 2 reservations outside of my town, the Mattaponi and the Pamunkey, who are descendants of the Powhatan. And then, of course, that part of the world, or part of the country, was the largest site of free land-owning Blacks in Virginia prior to the Civil War. So again, I mention all that to say that is a very rich and diverse place, that my parents chose to raise us in. Also, Hampton University, Virginia State University, and Norfolk State University are some of the HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, that made up sort of that region, as well as William Mary and Old Dominion University. So there was a lot of things that were just already working really well just where I was brought up, right? And the types of parents I had, they both had gone to HBCUs themselves. So they were very grounded in their own Black history and their own sort of self and their own identities, and raising us in such a multicultural but historic and sort of colonial place like Gloucester, Virginia, and being part of the military sort of helped to create a very, I guess, multicultural and diverse worldview for our children. So that was just the beginning, right? And so the older I got, our parents kept us around. They didn't send us off to school. We all grew up in this local community from birth to high school, and then I went off to college in Philadelphia at Temple University. And I chose Temple because it was the #1 school on Princeton's review, on the Princeton Review for multiculturalism. It was such a big deal to me back at that time. It was in 2000. For me to be at institutions that treasured multiculturalism and diversity. And now, I think 20 years later, institutions and corporations have sort of caught up with, sort of branding themselves as diverse and multicultural places. But 20 years ago, that was the most important thing for me. And I think that's how that shaped my life, right? I'm not used to being in any place where there's like one dominant group over any other. So I think, and even that sort of shaped my sensibilities for justice, which is what would eventually lead me to found Hacking Racism, right? I thought, why aren't there more people, particularly in the tech spaces or at the Ivy Leagues, doing more to combat racism? Why do we leave it up to a few people? Why aren't the average, person or people, at least with accesses and resources, doing more? And that, came from this sense of justice and this sense of, multiculturalism that I grew up with. So I'll leave it at that. But those are some of the biggest things that sort of shaped me while growing up. My parents, the military, growing up in a very diverse place like Colonial, Virginia, the Tidewater area, and then having diverse and multicultural voices just as a natural part of my world.
Thank you so much, Darold, for sharing that personal bit of the story with us. And as you say, multiculturalism is probably more important now than ever. And how an important role it has played in your life. That's a really inspiring story for all of us here. And thank you so much for sharing that. Now, since now we and our audience know a little bit about you, let's move the discussion towards the focus goal, that is SDG 12, and also sustainability in general. And you have been part of the ecosystem for quite a long time now, and you know about the key factors contributing to the present sustainable system. And I had a question, as I read in some articles, that economic, environmental, and social concerns constitute the three basic pillars of the Sustainable Development Principle. So what I would ask you is, like, you have been part of education, and you've seen it in different ways. So how do we really integrate these three pillars, that is economic, environmental, and social concerns, into our educational ecosystem, so that we actually grow the mindset of being sustainable from a very young age? What would you say?
Well, as someone who has spent some time in the media, I have to say that what we have to do, particularly in the media, and of course other people as well, is we have to shine the spotlight on people that are already doing these things, right? Because none of this stuff is new, and people have been doing things in these spaces, even since pre-colonialism. So a lot of my work has focused on decolonizing and indigenizing, right? And I think as we sort of come into the sort of second stage of decolonization throughout the world, be it Africa, be it here, even in the States, as we look to sort of decolonize from, as we look to not make the colonial narrative the only narrative or the most dominant narrative, we start to look at how other people have lived. And of course, being from Virginia, growing up close to indigenous communities, the indigenous population throughout the world, but especially in the Americas, are literally the ones leading these environmental and these, all the tenets of the SDG 12. They're the ones that have been doing it, prior to sort of our industrialism and our corporatism and our capital or late stage capitalism phase that we find ourselves in now. And so a lot of it, I think, is changing the narrative and, bringing these stories of these communities into sort of a mainstream, a broader mainstream storytelling. Because again, there's nothing new under the sun, and the solutions to these problems, will not be solved by the same level of thinking that created the problems in the first place. And so again, I'll end with this idea of decolonizing and indigenizing, right? We have to understand that even for the fact that I speak English, right, and I am not from England, we have to look at and have a conversation about this is a colonial system, particularly in the States or the Americas, that I find myself in, but there's an indigenous presence that's been here, since before 1492. I think the U.S. has 527 federally recognized tribes, so there's a lot of information to learn from people that have literally been stewards of our earth, for hundreds of thousands of years, according to their stories. And I think it's more of a matter of, letting them tell their stories, instead of, dominating the conversation with our corporatist, greed, really, level of capitalism that we've sort of found ourselves in now.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And in fact, of course, India has also been, part of the colony as known, and we were one of the biggest one that the mighty empire had at some point. But yeah, I mean, as you said, I think this bringing these stories of indigenous stories, to the front, and going back to the roots in terms of how we lived and interacted with nature is probably some of the things that we can probably learn and sort of bring back and marry sort of technology into it and sort of make things happen at a much better and larger scale. Some really great suggestions. Now, since you were talking about sort of indigenous stories and decolonizing. One of the things that I will probably dive now into is that you did your MA in oral history, and you love fact-based truth-telling and a great story unfiltered. So I noticed that you also worked on a thesis well as to sort of counter the systematic and institutional harm to marginalized communities endemic to the platform, documenting the communities that registered Western colonialism and create their own safe spaces. But the fact remains that we know that still marginalized groups exist nearly everywhere, and they're excluded from the economic, political, cultural, or social activities. So how do we really change this? And secondly, that they can play a great role in actually helping us achieve these SDGs together. So how do we really make them part of that ecosystem as well? What would be your suggestions?
Well, that very question has literally brought me to the Kennedy School, and I'm excited to be a Center for Public Leadership Fellow, working on these issues and thinking strongly about that. But also, I have to say, even that conversation isn't new, right? Many people have been thinking about the same exact question and actually have great solutions. And it actually stems back to what I said earlier. People who have the power, who have the access, who have the gatekeeping storytelling abilities, or at least who have the access to resources to tell stories, have to, pass the mic or step aside or step back or expand their own knowledge base and include these communities, because these communities have been here. At this point, and I'll call out my own media industry, including Hollywood, anybody telling sort of, colonized stories, and hey, I'll go there, white-only stories or stories where marginalized people I think the New York Times critic Manohla Dargis created the phrase, the DuVernay test, right? Which was named after filmmaker Ava DuVernay, to check, to test, to see if any story that's coming out, do they place Black or marginalized people and and indigenous people and people of color in the scene, and do they censor their stories? Or are they just what she called sort of like furniture or, props in white stories? I think we really have to tackle systemic white supremacy and institutionalized racism, right? As much as many people don't want to talk about these things, but this is a really big issue when people from Europe invade other countries and set up colonies and then create race and to justify marginalizing people or making people minorities or not having them have equal play into their lives. This has to be dismantled, and a lot of my work, seeks to do that. But again, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I mentioned Manohla Dargis, from the New York Times. Ava DuVernay leads the pack probably of today doing stuff like that. There's been many people. Columbia's first Black woman to receive tenure is historian Barbara Fields, who with her sister, who is another historian, Karen Fields, wrote the book Racecraft, right? About how this idea of race or the system of race has no biological, genetic, or scientific basis. And we should not even be using these things, right, as if they were real. She wrote the book Racecraft back in 2012. And even the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates, publicly said that book changed his whole mind about race and racism. And of course, we know that he went on to write amazing work about these issues. I think that, again, that is something that has to be tackled and literally, dismantled. There's systemic racism, the institutionalized white supremacy that sort of, causes these unconscious bias that then has Hollywood, pumping out these horrible misplaced movies, or that has, newspaper journalists writing stories, again, that exclude people. And I focus a lot on stories because the story is the most important thing for any person and for any culture and for any community. I mean, when we meet people, our first thing is like, oh, so what's their story, right? We want to know the narrative. And if people have been left out of the narrative, then that's like they've been erased, right? And so I think we have to literally focus on back to, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but we really have to focus on decolonizing and indigenizing. Again, I mentioned Ava DuVernay and the New York Times, Manola Dargis, and Barbara and Karen Fields, Claudia Rankin, who is now a Yale University professor, but is a great poet who wrote, whose work, Citizen, sort of talked about the microaggressions that living in racialized cultures, due to minoritized people. There's so many people that have been writing about this. There's so many people that have been, talking about the need to sort of do things, to do these things. I mean, I'm thinking of Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times. Many people have been writing and saying these things, and it's time to finally to get the political will to do so, which is why I'm at the Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership.
Yeah, I mean, Daryl, one question that comes to my mind is, one argument that is put forward that media only produces the content that people want to consume. This is an argument that is given over and over, and probably we don't want to hear those stories, and that's why they don't make them. And I find this argument to be completely absurd. And so I want to know that being in America, because I'm only talking from an Indian perspective, and but I'm pretty sure that the story is pretty much same everywhere. And how do you really, sort of flip the argument and say that, no, we actually do want to hear it. You don't make them, so that's why we have never seen them. So we don't know how good they are, right? So what would be your opinion on this? How do we really, convince the content creators and distributors and producers to make more of these stories, for us, so that we also, sort of consume them and it becomes a part of the mainstream?
Thank you so much for that question. It's such an amazing question. It's really what led me to start hacking, creating, or at least incubate hacking racism at the Columbia Business School's incubator. Coming from the media, I have a bachelor's in theater, and sort of have been in spaces that literally are storytelling spaces. I agree with you, and I just say that's a lie. Like, right? So if anyone says that, I'm all about being bold and provocative and saying that's a lie. It is a lie. There's been many published reports that says the more diverse the story is, the higher the profit, the tickets get sold. Of course, we've seen it with, Beyonce and all the other people who were part of The Lion King, right? We've seen all this sort of diverse storytelling now that the Western world or the Western media industrial complex has started to allow to be told. But in order for that to continue, again, I think we have to be bold and we have to call out people who literally lie and call them liars, right? So with hacking racism, we started to focus on the fact that unfortunately, most people don't even know that there is no such thing as race, scientifically, genetically, biologically, right? And that there's only racism. Most people don't even know the origins of these places. I also want to lift up Berkeley's, or I think one of the UC professors, John A. Powell. He has a great 4-minute or 5-minute clip. I think you can find it on YouTube, called The Invention of the White Race. There's also a book called that, written in the 70s by Theodore W. Allen, where literally they go through the history of how the colonial elite created the concept of race to convince the European lower classes to go work in the colonies, right? And to keep that sort of idea going that there were people that were white, there were people that were not white, and the not whites could be, separated into categories and to a hierarchy of privileges and oppressions. So a lot of it too, from what we do at Hacking Racism, is to just tell the truth. I also like to bring up, there was a rumor going around about the Matrix series, how it was made by this Black woman who literally was using it to talk about race and white supremacy, right? That there are people who really walk around and think they are colors that other people are not. And how important it is to, again, as a historian, as an academic, and as a journalist, this might not become as a surprise. This might not come as a surprise, is to tell the truth, tell the facts. I think a lot of what the media and all of its, iterations have done is not tell the truth. It's not lie. Even the New York Times had to have an overlooked section, right, for people they would not cover. And it's quite ironic that, Nicole Hannah-Jones, who literally says she looks, her biggest Hebrew was Ida B. Wells, was described in the New York Times in the worst ways ever. They were slandering her as a Black woman. I think they called her a nasty mulattress, right? So I think, part of this coming to terms with racism and dismantling these colonial ills like white supremacy is looking through the archives, at our newspapers, at Hollywood, at academia. Even Harvard has the Harvard and Slavery Initiative. Columbia has a Columbian Slavery Project. I'm sure many places in India and the other colonized worlds are starting to look at their own history, what colonialism and its ills and its sins. From where I am in Virginia, we have all these plantations that are still in these families, right? They've inherited these 300-year-old plantations where so much horror happened, but we have to tell the truth about what happened, right? We have to tell the truth about our history, because if we don't, we will continue to replicate the lies that people say, oh, people don't want to see diverse stories, when the facts prove otherwise. And I think, again, we have to be brave and we have to be bold. A lot of people, back to Ta-Nehisi Coates, he was at Harvard actually a few years ago now, where he said, it was during the, I'm trying to remember the exact conference, but it was a conference held at Harvard that was talking about the reckoning, right, with the media, with academia, about the narratives that they told about people they had branded not white. And he literally said, before now, if you even talked about these things, you would lose your job or would get hired. So a part of it is I have to recognize my own privilege, right, and my own sort of access and safety and sheltering, where I can be this bold, where I can, incubate something like hacking racism at New York's Ivy League school, and then going to be a fellow at Harvard. And so again, I think people with privilege, with access, if you're a male in a patriarchal society, you have to stand up for women who are being treated as less than. If you're someone who is white in a white supremacist culture, you have to stand up and dismantle that stuff. If you're someone with privilege in a culture where most people are oppressed, you have to be willing to stand up. And I think in our day and time, as social media and emergent technology and all these other sort of technologies or platforms allows for a democratization of the media and of the narrative, this is going to happen regardless of whether or not people want to, whether some people want it to happen or not. So you have to sort of take a choice and say, what side of history am I going to be on, right? Am I going to be the one leading the progress and being the ones to advocate for people who can't speak up? Or am I going to be the person who just, wants the status quo or hides and say, well, I don't want to lose my job? And I think, that is something really important to think about. Think about how brave we can be, how bold we can be in telling truth to power.
As you rightly said, Darold, we should be willing to stand up for what is right and what needs to be done. And that's I think, one of my takeaways from this answer. Well, now let me dive a little deeper into what we are discussing. And I think digital art, Digital Earth can really be a new platform for achieving sustainability, and it helps in saving a lot of physical resources of the earth. You work actively, your work actively dismantles the sort of settler colonial narrative, perspective, lens, and worldview of the colonial culture, as you said. Sorry. Especially the effects of sort of this digital tech or data colonialism, as you call it. Now, I was really fascinated by that, so I'd love to know more about, what is this data colonialism, and how do you think sort of digital colonialization can be an obstacle for achieving sustainability? So please tell us more about your work in that space, and how can we also contribute?
Yes, and again, there are great people that have led this path that I just sort of stand on the shoulders of, or I'm just following. Ruha Benjamin at Princeton, Renata Avila at Stanford. Many people are in this space that are looking at this. As the Wikipedia fellow and at the Ivy League, the first one, which means that, some of the highest level of academia is starting to take places like Wikipedia seriously. The fact that Wikipedia is the largest site for knowledge in the world, so whether or not you take it seriously or not, it's there. Sort of is right to have these conversations, right? Because digital colonialism, data colonialism are a part of the broader tech colonialisms ills that are happening. As we know, colonialism was when Western European countries invaded other countries and colonized them and stayed, and so they became settler colonial cultures. And they did that by very, very brutal tactics, from mass indigenous genocides to the Atlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were taken from their homelands and spread throughout the world, or even in this the vein of India, where they were just sort of like taken over, and the whole culture sort of revamped to meet England or the Western European resource needs. And of course, the first thing I say is we have to be factual, right? This stuff happened. And because it happened, and it happened for centuries, every layer of every section of society has literally built upon that and replicated it. From education to journalism, as we talked about, from entertainment to politics, government, every level of society. And of course, technology is no different. The thing about technology, because technology has a sort of exponential result, technology has unfortunately made all the colonialism exponentially harmful, right? It's made it like a virus even more deadly. So say, for example, there's a bunch of files sitting in an archive, right? And we want to have them digitized. Depending on there is almost no doubt that those files or those documents have been written from a colonized point of view, right? Which, as I discussed, has given us white supremacy and institutionalized racism. When we digitize them, right, and then we add on a whole. As we digitize them, we're adding on a whole nother layer of colonization, of colonialism, and anything that uses that data that is now in the cloud or in the tech or in the digital space is only going to replicate whatever that colonial or that colonized information, that language, that narrative is. And we see that, of course, with Facebook. Facebook takes people's data and uses it in a way that it can then sell it and make money. And trust me, the companies that are buying this information are major, colonial or colonized cultures, post-colonial, right? Companies. And of course, in the vein of Wikipedia, Wikipedia has to have secondary sources for any information that's on it, right? So any page that's written about Wikipedia has to be secondarily sourced. And the first set of sources that the public turns to is the newspaper, right? The media industry. So as we just talked about, the media and the newspaper industry are very racist industries systemically, right? I don't think anyone sets out to be racist anymore. They might have in the past, but because these newspapers, these media companies were created in a system of white supremacy and institutionalized racism, that's what they're writing. So Wikipedia then takes what they were writing and creates a whole page that is encyclopedic about whatever topic it is, and then that is used, like you said, in the work that you do. YouTube and Facebook have now started to use Wikipedia as a fact-checking source. And on the surface, that sounds amazing, right? The idea of Wikipedia is amazing. Taking the world's information and make it accessible for free. But when we say the world, the world from Wikipedia, because it was created in the US by two white men. One was from the South, that has its own issues, but created in this ecosystem of systemic white supremacy, of institutionalized racism, because the sources are racist, right? And so then Wikipedia creates encyclopedic information about these places, which is then picked up But like you said, not just YouTube and Facebook, but shoot, graduate students at Harvard and Oxbridge are using this information, if not in their own scholarly work, right? They're using it to get a sense of even what a subject might be. And the sources that are listed at the end of every single Wikipedia page, again, has come from the colonized world. Because Wikipedia has some horrible stats, right? I think over 80% of Wikipedia editors are white men from the global north, right? Who have privilege and time and education to sit and write an encyclopedic, article, and then to sort of have the time and energy to engage in the very toxic conversations that happen on Wikipedia as the articles are approved to be published. And that alone skews the output of what appears on Wikipedia. So much of Wikipedia is written from a white point of view, right? On just the surface, on top of a white male point of view, right? Very male. Wikipedia does even worse in the male to female balance. The majority of Wikipedia editors are male. So the text of Wikipedia is being written from a white male point of view, which is the epitome of white supremacy, right? Systemic white supremacy. I'm not calling anybody white supremacist, but the system of whiteness that permeates all of our colonized cultures are centered on Wikipedia. Now there are many efforts to try to offset that by getting more people of color, more people from non-white cultures to write. But there was a report that says Wikipedia grows so quickly, and now because of technology, there are bots that are writing pages faster than any person can even try to correct for many of these things. And again, that's the epitome of the data, digital, and tech colonialism that is happening. There's so much great technology, but that technology is, is garbage in, garbage out. The data that the technology is using is the most horrible, is colonized data, is data that has been written from a colonized point of view. And of course, that is sort of the epitome of what we call data colonialism, which exists in the bigger ecosystem of tech colonialism. And as things become digitized, digital colonialism. Now, I've spoken a lot about that, so if you have any questions, I was all over the place. But I'll just say, as Wikipedia's first Ivy League fellow, or the Ivy League's first Wikipedia fellow, it was really great to sit down at Columbia, in the city of New York, with the libraries, right? Barnard College and Columbia University library system. We were really having this conversation about, well, what can the universities do? What can the academy do? And there's a lot of privilege to be at a place like Columbia at the Ivy League. But the good thing about that is that all these people there that have access to, what the mainstream usually doesn't have access to, the journals, the scholarship, can then use that to use their access to start, figuring out, not just adding it to Wikipedia, because like I said, that's not going to change the majority of the stuff that's already on there. But, I'm forever the optimist, right? If there are problems, the newer generations are going to solve them. And that's, again, something that I treasure the youth for. The youth are all right. The kids are all right. And they're figuring out ways to solve all the messes our older generations have created. So, again, with Disrupt Wikipedia, which you founded at Columbia, many of these people were young, were undergraduates, right? Of course, some graduates as well, but young people who were interested and engaged and passionate about doing this work, that were sort of tackling these projects. Tackling these problems. And I would have to defer to them to see what they come up with, because we're not even 2 years old yet, to figure out, what the end will be. But I'm very optimistic.
This is very, very insightful, Darold. Thank you so much for sharing. I had no idea about sort of data colonialism in that detail, and thank you so much for enlightening us. So one of the things that I'd like to probably mention is that so in my line of work, which is also relates to fact and trivia, because I'm a quizmaster by profession, and that's where I try to use quiz and games as a tool for people engagement, and awareness is a large part of and educational awareness is a large part of my work. And satisfying curiosity when it comes to that. That's almost my life's mission, to sort of make curiosity available as a skill to people so that they can use. And Wikipedia plays a really, really crucial role in that, because the fact that free knowledge is gold, and every individual has the right to get educated, and sort of education is very important and one of the basic pillars for achieving SDGs as well. So keeping that in mind, that we consume so much data and so much information from these free knowledge resources, whether it's Wikipedia or Project Gutenberg, or there's so many others, that are there. And as you were saying, that the data itself is, the colonial data, and it sort of gets replicated and replicated and replicated. This is one of these jokes that used to go around quite a lot, is the Wikipedia is the public toilet of the internet, right? So, but they of course try to change that narrative with citations and things like that, and the things that you've shared today is really, really interesting. But what boils down to my question is that it's a good thing that we have Wikipedia, and we need more and more of those free knowledge. But as you rightfully said, that we also need to get the facts right. How do young people contribute? Because we have a lot of people who already are consuming this, but how can we make ourselves useful now that we are also not just a consumer, but we also became creator and producers, and give voice to the right things, as you say?
Young people are just, doing what they do. And I think that's the best thing. The young people today are bold or brave. They create, everything from TikTok to they use, all these different platforms that I am even too old to even understand at this point in my 30s. I just think the youth just do it. It has to keep doing what they do, right? I'm not anyone to even get in the way of what they're doing. I think what I can say about what I love about what our youth is doing, and they're doing so many things, is that the boldness and the bravery, right? We're seeing all these sort of barriers and these walls being torn down, which are and the youth are leading these. I'm trying to think of just one thing to talk about that I've seen, but I'll just talk about the broader thing. Everything from how race and racism literally are being torn down in a place like the U.S. where we're tearing down Confederate statues. People are marching for Black Lives Matter, and people are advocating for the indigenous communities just at a higher rate than ever on this planet, or on these countries. It's just again more testament to how bold and brave the youth are, because those are young people out there doing it. I'm not even they're the ones out in the streets, and they're the ones raising hell and just taking steps into their own hands and making the change that they want to see, right? When I think about sort of like the civil rights movement and how many people marched and begged and pleaded for civil rights, I always say that our youth are not marching and begging. They are marching and making, right? They are making things the way that they want to see. And again, that's just so amazing for me to even witness and to be, alive in this time, to see that, because I kind of thought I was bold and brave, and I was, a firecracker. But I hear what the post millennials are doing, because I'm technically a millennial, and I'm just blown away. And again, I'm heartened, right? I'm excited for all the many different things that youth are doing by just showing up and engaging, by just being who they are, right? By just espousing their values and literally refusing to carry on things that they don't believe in. So the youth are right, and again, they are our saving grace.
Yes, as you said, let's keep marching and keep making. So, Darold, at this point, I will, bring the focus slightly towards the focus goal that we had for the discussion, which is the goal 12, and Of course, with the emergence of COVID-19, has many ways underscored the relationship between people and nature and revealed sort of the fundamental tenets of the trade-off we consistently face. That is, we humans have unlimited needs, but the planet has limited capacity to satisfy them. And we are sort of never satisfied. So, and still industries and countries, sort of have a competitive mindset, and they keep producing bulk. And there's this whole concept of industrialization. I think even though it has evolved over time, it hasn't changed its mindset per se. So my question to you is that how do we really move towards a more need or requirement oriented approach of production? And we're all consumers. And one of the things that I learned during my studies with gamification is that changing behavior, consumer behavior is the toughest part. And changing our own behavior is also very difficult. So what are some of the things that you would say that we could do to become a better consumer?
Well, one thing I will say, I think, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call our planet, but particularly centering in the feminine sort of sensibilities. I don't want to downplay how horrible this pandemic is and how COVID is, how terrible COVID has sort of destroyed our fabric in our current society with so many deaths and so many illnesses. But the silver lining is that it is forcing us to not only look at what we've been doing, but to stop because we can no longer continue on as, we can no longer continue the status quo. I mean, COVID has forced, places, industries like, the private jet or the plane, the planes and the cars and all the other sort of polluting factors of our lives that we just take for granted, and we sort of like, well, we need it. And I think it's forced us to realize not only do we not need it, the earth doesn't want it, right? I mean, there's been so many reports of because of cars and planes and other pollutants like just human activity being sort of curtailed. We've seen like water get clear. I think Italy was talking about how a lot of its canals are clear, and we've seen animals come back into spaces where animals have fled because of high human traffic and lots of pollution. And I think, again, so I just want to say that I think humans are not as powerful as we think we are. Mother Nature does a little shake, and we're literally stuck at home. We're at a pause, and I think it's again a heads up that not only are we not going to be able to continue the status quo, but it's in our best interest if we want to live to get in front of this and to adopt all the sustainable goals that the UN with SDGs have already laid out for us. 2030 is not too far away, a decade now, and I think again the silver lining of COVID is that I am optimistic that we're going to be forced to have to live differently, right? And I think at this point, people want to, right? Nobody really wants to waste, goods and services because of corporate profits and bottom lines. And so, there's a small group that are well fed and overweight, while a majority of people don't get fed. And most people don't want to have the pollutants that come from too many cars and too many planes and too many corporate, chimneys and waste products that are unregulated. So I think we're seeing a shift in how we advocate for how we want to live, right? A larger majority of us, not just celebrities or politicians. And I think, COVID has forced us to really sit down and take stock. So again, I applaud, I'm grateful for Mother Nature giving us yet another chance, before she just does away with us, to really sit and think and make better choices.
Thank you, Darold, for sharing those insights and telling us your story. I have a younger voice with me. Anushka is a young student from India, and she has a couple of questions for you. So I was just asking you the easier ones. Probably this will be the tougher ones. So, Anushka, please introduce yourself and ask your questions.
All right. So I'm a second year student doing my bachelor's in human resource management and psychology. And I am doing it from Delhi, which is the capital of India. And I'm doing it from Delhi University, which is quite a renowned university for arts in India. And I'm planning to actually pursue my career in human resource management itself, as I believe personally that human resources are the most important resource any nation, any organization can ever have. So yeah, and I actually do theater. So I love theater. And yeah, I guess that is pretty much about me so far. Uh, So I can move on to the question now. The question for you is, you are a social impact innovator and entrepreneur at a very young age, and there is a huge population of youth out there who is on the same path of becoming a social entrepreneur and moving into more social fields. So how do you think that we as youth, or I can say uh, personally me, we can use the best use of the resources that are available to us, be it physical resources or digital resources?
Just to clarify, although thank you so much for being here, Anushka, and again, congrats and good luck on your journey. And of course, our love of theater keeps us alive with our great storytelling. So just to make sure I have your question right, you're asking how can people who want to be social innovators and social entrepreneurs you better use the resources that we have access to? I just want to make sure. Okay, I'll be honest. I am bad with labels. I don't, really know. People stick these labels. I was called a social innovator and called a social entrepreneur because there were things I saw that had problems and I wanted to solve them. And I think, particularly with Columbia's Business School's incubator, there's the business school, the Columbia's Business School has a great social innovation project because it is in a place like New York City, which again has a great social innovation and social entrepreneurship bent. Even our biggest billionaires there, our biggest industry leaders are constantly thinking about, not just the bottom line, but how are we making things good for everyone? And so I think that anyone who wants to get into that space or who wants to think about how do we use the resources, again, and being in a place like Delhi, and I love Delhi and I love India, there's so much opportunity, right? And there's so much opportunity for young people who are passionate. So again, there was no premeditated path that I took to get here. I opened up with, just being open and being kind. And I'll be honest, I haven't always been the most open person or the most kind person. I'm human just like everyone else. I have my failings. But I think, being a good person and wanting to do good, the universe, Mother Earth, will literally place you in spaces and will match the energy. Not to be too, spiritual here, but because that's what my experience has been. When I came with the idea of hacking racism with my co-founders, we were not thinking of Columbia, we weren't thinking of the business school, we weren't even there. No, we were nowhere near there. But as we started talking and chatting with people, there are people saying, "Oh, you should come do this," and before you know it, we're in an incubator and being called and social entrepreneurs and social innovators. And then of course that just translates into leads you to more work, right? So if I'm looking at friends who are at Wikipedia and asking me questions about well, Wikipedia has this issue, what can we do, and I was just happened to be in that space and talking to people, and before you know it, Disrupt Wikipedia comes from that. And even with my master's thesis at Columbia, Mapping Freedom, where we set out to map all the freedom colonies, I am a descendant of many of these spaces. I actually got a call from my paternal great-grandmother's family, who were like, "Hey, come keynote our 150th anniversary." And I was down there and I took my Hacking Racism co-founder, and started to realize like, wow, these stories are just amazing. Why aren't they being heard? And then of course we just went through the media and the journalism and the issues there. So I was like, wait, why can't I do something about that? Or I can at least map these places. So just started to get in touch with the different people and that are from these places and that were from the historical societies of the freedom colonies. And again, these things were very organic. I'm not smart enough to have planned any of this, so that's something I can tell the youth as well. That you don't have to think you're the smartest person. You just have to have passion to solve a problem. And trust me, the universe will match your energy and bring you people, resources, and all kinds of sort of help that you didn't even think existed. So that's my long-winded question. Sorry, answer to your question. Long-winded answer to your question.
All right, that was actually very enlightening. I do believe that communication is the key actually. The more you communicate, the more knowledge you get. So yeah. Now moving on to my second question. Can you suggest 3 steps, basically 3 things or actions that young individuals can take to contribute towards the goal, achieving the SDG goals in general? Like what youth can do, what I can particularly do to contribute to it?
I think you just, again, that's a great question. And I think you literally just answered one of the first ones. It's communicate, right? Talk amongst your friends. Anything that you have a issue with or a passion for, or if there's a solution that you think, could work, or if there's just a problem that you see, the more people you talk to, again, that's been my experience. It is so true that, 2 heads are better than 1, 3 heads are better than 2, and so on and so on. Before you know it, someone's going to have some sort of idea that then gets you to your next step. So the first thing I would say is communication. Do not be afraid to open your mouth and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. There's an issue, there's a problem, or I think I have a solution. No matter how dumb you think the idea is, right? Because I've been, I've had some really ideas that didn't let's say that didn't work out. But even if the first thing or the second or the third or the 10th or 100th thing failed, what you learn from that and the friends and the colleagues and associations you make will help the next thing that you come up with get better. So the first step is to communicate. The second step, I think, is just to take action, to start small, right? After you've communicated, think about what's the next thing you can do. And it might be just as simple as, calling your local politician, right? Or asking for a meeting with them and just brainstorming or learning about what are they doing in that space, right? What are they doing to help whatever problem or passion or solution you might have, because there's nothing new under the sun. Again, I mentioned about the indigenous communities. They've been thinking and acting on climate change and all the different, all the different issues that we have for hundreds or thousands of years. And it just takes someone to just go and connect and to sit and, so I would say communicate and then connect, right? And again, this wasn't planned. But the third thing I would say is then to act, right? After you communicate, after you reach out to make a connection to people, to someone, even if it's just, you're a sort of group of friends, come up with a plan of action, right? The plan of action could be, maybe it is just going to have a talk with your politician or writing letters to, different nonprofits or even companies or even people that you think might be open to your idea or might be doing what you're doing. You never know where things might go. There are emails I wrote to people over years ago that I'm just now getting answers to. I mean, Harvard might have something to do with it, but as you sort of stay your course, you will. I mean, there's a phrase, and it is a phrase I've heard from Denzel Washington. He says this quite a few times, like, if you stick around the barbershop long enough, you're going to get a haircut, right? And I think he was even talking about to people who wanted to make it in the acting industry. He's like, just don't give up. So with the take action, I would say taking action implies don't give up. Don't stop. Even if the first thing or the second thing or the 100th thing doesn't have the solution or the outcome you would like, keep on keeping on, never give up. So I hope those are 3, maybe 4 things with don't give up that answer your question.
Thank you so much, Anushka, for your questions. And thank you so much, Darold, for such a beautiful and insightful session and enlightening us with so many things that we probably didn't know before. But, it's always hard to sum up at the end of such an insightful session. But as a host, I'll try my best. Few of the things that I'm going to definitely take away from this conversation and is going to stick around with me and hopefully with everyone who is listening in and joining in as well, is that, first of all, be open to life and be kind. All the narratives that we know always ask questions, and we must decolonize and indigenize the narratives that we know. And we can only do that if we ask questions and bring the right stories front. Multiculturalism is more important now than ever. So everywhere you go, please believe in multiculturalism and not individualism. And as Darold said, we must, in fact, we have to be willing to stand up for what is right. We have to probably rethink on how we advocate for how we want to live in the future, because that is what's going to determine the future of the planet as well. More importantly, for the young listeners and whoever is joining in, keep marching and keep making. And don't forget, as Darold suggested, communicate, connect, but more importantly, act. Darold, once again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your beautiful story. But since you know that I'm a quiz master and I never run out of questions, but I promise this will be my last question to you, and that is, if you have to sum up your vision for a better world in one sentence, what would that be?
My vision for a better world. Again, I would have to just repeat myself like the broken record, which I've been. Be kind, be open. I think if everyone is at least aware, I'll say by being present, right? Being aware of the people that are around you, engaging with the people that are around you. And I'll have to use the same quote I used earlier. Being kinder than necessary, right? Because everyone you meet is fighting some sort of battle. That creates the empathy that allows for the connection. So then you can communicate and then you can act. So I hope that's not too long, but that's my vision.
On that kinder note, for everyone who is listening in and joining in, remember, for a world where no one is left behind, it has never been clearer that all of us have a role to play in order to bring about change. Whoever you are, no matter where you come from, every one of us can make a difference. Every action truly counts. Get involved, attend the SDG Action Conclave 2020, participate in the SDG quiz, help raise awareness about the goals, and connect with a global community of passionate volunteers. This Global Goals Week, let us all come together to spread the knowledge about people, planet, and our sustainable development goals. Thank you all once again for joining us. Follow us on Instagram at Youth Forum India for all the updates. And don't forget to join our next session. Darold, thank you so much from the bottom of our heart for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule and talking to us. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you.